Hello all, and welcome back to round 2 of the spoiler breakdown. I'm Em, and I'm here to guide you through all of the cards that are currently listed in the Cold Hunt preview package. There are a bunch of new cards in the client, and some of them we've already reviewed, so we'll try to skip over those where we can, but we are going to be talking about as many of them as possible, and hopefully we can get through the pile of them today in one video. We will see. It's going to be an exciting time. Yeah, but we're going to be covering a lot of the new cards. There's a ton of cool stuff here. I've already looked through everything and checked it all out, and yeah, there's some really interesting draft cards in particular. I think it's going to be a really fun draft environment based on everything that we've seen so far from the spoilers. So let's go ahead and get right into it, starting with the 0-cost red card, Warning Shot. All right, so Warning Shot. Inscribe, deal 1 damage. Ooh, I wonder if I could actually do premiums only. Nah, okay, doesn't quite work. Okay, Warning Shot. Inscribe, deal 1 damage. So this is something that basically is a single slow spell, deals a damage, or places a depleted power. Neither of those are things that we'd necessarily want in your deck individually, but combined together, this is a card that fixes your power and also kills small units that are blocking you and messing with your stuff. I think that actually, deal 1 damage at 0 is not unreasonable for aggro, considering that aggro basically just wants to get its early units down, attack with them, and not be blocked, and being able to knock out any 1 health units that your opponent might have is particularly strong. For example, if your opponent plays an open way supplier on 2, Warning Shot allows you to dismiss with that card and then go ahead and move on in without any other issues. Although notably, open way supplier has been nerfed as of this patch. It has 1 less health, or 1 less strength. If it had 1 less health, it would just be dead. Still, this is a card that really allows you to clear a lot of the smaller chaff units or deal a little bit of extra damage when you need to without actually impacting your tempo at all. The main thing it costs you is cards, and when it doesn't cost you cards, you're playing it as a depleted power to fix your own influence or power, which certainly might be something that you're pretty interested in. We love Accordion and Bullseye, and Sensari Firebrand and Bang. These are all cards that we've already reviewed, but they are pretty exceptional. Molten Feet is a charge inscribe 4-cost 3/2. It is a Grenadin notably, and if we see a lot of Grenadin, I think that will boost a number of the other cards that are coming up in this particular setup. It's okay as far as options go. I will say I think it's repeating a particular piece of art. This looks very similar to the 2/4 Berserk Grenadin. Has the exact same sort of pose and movement going on, although it is in transit in the air, which I do rather like. It's still okay as far as things goes. This seems like a very simple sort of filler card for when you're trying to just get units in draft and want to deal a little bit of damage. It's not terribly efficient, but it does have charge, and it does have inscribe, and the two of those things together make it a pretty awesome limited option, and very unlikely for expedition. Calderian Captain, Revenge 4/3. Your other units have +1 strength. So this is actually a pretty good take, I would say, on the pseudo rally effect that a lot of different units give. I think the standout sort of comparison model here is General Azalea, a 6/4 quick draw for 6 that gives +2 to each other unit. Calderian Captain has a couple of different things going for it. It doesn't provide quite as strong of a bonus, and it doesn't have quite as good of stats, but it is sticky, and that's something that red decks often don't have access to, and that is particularly good on a card that is providing a global buff. I would look to this card to be a pretty strong limited or draft presence due to its ability to enhance all of the cards that tend to get through for damage, overwhelm cards, quick draw cards, unblockable cards, and flying cards, as well as to just sort of make your entire board trade better while also not costing you much in terms of overall value, since the card has revenge and can sort of stay put over the course of a long time, which is really good. That being said, most red decks that are fast are not going to want this quite as much because while giving your other units +1 strength is still good, in general you're trying to kill your opponent a little bit faster than playing a 5-drop. So this is a card that has a nice persistent bonus and continues to be consistent over the course of a game that will sort of trends towards the mid-range, but I would not be certain to see it in Expedition or Throne unless there's a deck that really strongly wants something like this, mainly sacrifice tokens with Grenadins, where you're just trying to produce a lot of Grenadin and push across with them for lots of damage. In those situations, this card is situationally pretty useful. Hoof Stomp. This is a different take on a classic core set card that is 5 cost, deal 5 damage to an enemy without quick draw. And it's a slight improvement, I would say, although units with Overwhelm do tend to be a little bit more common, I believe, than units with quick draw. But yeah, this is an Overwhelm spell, deals 5 damage to a unit without Overwhelm, so just a really, really good draft removal spell that also happens to spill over damage on anything it kills to your opponent's face. So you're never really wasting your power when you're playing this. It's not an especially efficient card, but it is very strong removal that tends to get rid of the majority of cards that it's aiming at, which is something that is very, very important for red in particular to deal with when you're getting to the mid-range. This is a really important card for draft. It's one that you want to pick up very highly, and by and large, in Expedition, I could actually see it being played a little bit because of that Overwhelm ability and the fact that it's at least 1-for-1 damage, which is something that you generally are okay with having a little bit of. It's not great in multiples to have 1-for-1 damage, but typically having a little bit of reach with like Overwhelm and stuff like that just tends to be something that really helps red decks out because they frequently get their opponent down to like, 5, 8, some amount of health that's just very, very low, and they need some way to close out the game when their units get wrathed or harsh ruled or something along those lines. So Hoof Stomp could see some play in Expedition. Honestly, it could see a little bit of play in Throne. I don't think it's a super common card or a great idea in that particular circumstance. And it's a really, really good draft card, so cool stuff there. Lava Blood Rager, contract 3 exhaust to deal a 1 damage to an enemy unit. This is a pretty mediocre contract by and large. It basically makes it so that you play a 6 cost 5/5 and then you get to maybe kill a unit, but then you don't have a blocker for a round. The exhaust in particular is just like a little bit odd. There are, I think, versions of this card, I think an 8 cost that has warp and something like that and deals 5 damage to an enemy unit. This is a cheaper version of that effect. It does still actually create board advantage, and the card still does get to attack on the next turn. So if this is the last card in your at the top of your draft pool, you're pretty happy with it because it's very likely to play, kill something, and then start coming in for lots of damage. But the lack of a block is a pretty serious drawback in the exact same format. So, and in Expedition, it's just too slow. I don't think you're going to see a lot of play out of this, despite the general efficiency of dealing some damage to extra units. It's still got some, definite potential to influence the board, and that's the main reason not to count it out. But it is really inefficient for what it's doing, and it's also really expensive for what it's doing. All right. Okay, Oni Forgesmith, 6 cost, 6/4 Inscribe with contract 2, draw a weapon from your void and give it double damage. Ooh, that's delicious. This card looks to be an Armory Premier. I think this card does everything that Armory wants to do. It gets units back from the void, it gets weapons back from the void, it makes them bigger. If they have Overwhelm or Warcry or things like that, Quick Draw in particular, Overwhelm with Quick Draw on relic weapons really makes this a huge difference. And notably, it gets any relic weapon and gives it double damage, which also gives your spells double damage. This card is way stronger than it might look. I think it's actually not only a Premier Armory card, but because of the ability to give your spells double damage, could see play in some sets that just want to play like a 1-drop relic weapon or a 2-drop relic weapon. I'm not sure if there's a 1-drop relic weapon. I think there is, yeah. But yeah, if you just want to like grab a really, really small weapon from your void, give that weapon double damage, play the weapon, and then blast your opponent with spells, that is an Oni Forgesmith option that you can actually set up. And the card fixes your power, which, hey, that's a really good bonus. I see this card being played in Throne, Expedition, and Draft. In all situations, it's very strong. In Draft, it's reasonably efficient for its cost. It trades well, it has Inscribe, and it has a great contract. In every other format, like, this card is just really good with relic weapons and creates some interesting spell options. For an uncommon, this is a role player. Definitely keep an eye on this one. Dismantle. Inscribe, kill an enemy attachment with cost 4 or less. Not a big fan of these cost-related attachment destruction type things, but it'll kill most relics without too much issue. It's a fast spell, it's fairly efficient, and it has Inscribe, all of which are reasons to probably include it as a 1-of in draft decks and maybe as a 2-of in an Expedition deck. I could see it as a 4-of in an Expedition deck since the Inscribe is something that can give you a little bit of benefit, but by and large, it's not super amazing. Lost in Thought is very similar. I think we've reviewed that one already, but just very, pretty inflexible, but still pretty interesting and does fix your power. Okay, I think we've done Force Stall. Nascent Wisp, so 3 costs, 2/1 flying charge. It's a little unusual for time to have a charge unit, especially a flying unit. It's also unusual for time to have a fairly inefficient flyer that has more attack than health, this card seems a little out of place in general. It's also not very good, but the charge ability does give it some benefit, particularly in draft cards, and 2 attack is the minimum amount required for a flying card to have tempo in draft, so this is a reasonable flyer that will pair really well with any sort of global benefits you might get, Xenon Obelisk, that kind of thing. If you can actually get something along those lines going on, then maybe this will help, but by and large, I think it's like a fairly mediocre card and a good draft filler card. Okay, we talked about Valley Silence already. It's all right, not great. Evelina Valley's Guardian. Okay, so this is the new Evelina Valley Searcher, Dinosaur Explorer, once again. 5 cost, 4/3 with Charge, Inscribe, and Valor. Interesting to see Inscribe in the middle of those two, because both of those are battle skills, and then Inscribe is, you can play this as a power if you want to. So it looks like it's a little more impressive than it is, but it actually only has 2 keywords. The 2 keywords are okay, though. 4/3 is pretty reasonable, and when Evelina hits the enemy player, she creates and draws a 5/5 dinosaur with Overwhelm. So you're actually going to be very, very inclined to interact with Valor and try to actually get some benefit out of it. This card basically attacks as a 5/4 against any units that it's blocking, and deals 4 damage and gives you a card if it isn't blocked. Both of those are pretty significant upsides, and the card has charge, so it's very likely to redraw a 5/5 dinosaur, which is a reasonable stat line, the kind of thing that you'd expect to get off a monument. I think since this card typically replaces itself on an empty board, it is pretty okay in that respect, and a reasonable rare for your expedition decks. In Throne, a 5/5 dinosaur with Overwhelm is probably not going to be enough for 5, but it's still a pretty reasonable option that you could probably play a little bit. And in draft, this card's disgustingly strong. Bathed in Light. Something just isn't right. So 6 cost Inscribe, gain 6 health. You and your units are invulnerable to damage this turn. This is a lot of different things to have in a fast spell. You can use this offensively to create a pretty huge trick. You also get to stabilize yourself against the potential crackback of attacking with a bunch of different units and just expecting them to be blocked, and your opponent maybe doesn't. So that actually makes it so that Bathed in Light forces a bad situation where you just suddenly go all on tilt. If your opponent decides not to block and just try to crack back, then you get to reset your health and give yourself invulnerable to damage this turn, and the lack of trade means that you're in a lot of trouble as well. This card does not give your opponent any good choices, which is, I think, a really strong reason that it might see play in Expedition or Throne. The invulnerability to damage is really, really good overall. It makes it into a solid combat trick in very specific circumstances, but circumstances that are likely to arise nonetheless. And the 6 health is a good little bonus there that actually allows you to stabilize against red decks, particularly if you're just like struggling to maintain against them. If you just have like 1 or 2 little blockers against a pile of Grenadin and you block Bathed in Light, you kill 2 of the attackers, which is likely to reduce your opponent's board presence a ton. You get a bunch of health, and you don't take any damage. All of that's really, really good. Yeah, this card seems great, and notably, I believe it also counters out that 4 cost that deals damage equal to the amount of health you've gained. So, like, even if your opponent is like, haha, I deal 5 damage to you after this, nope, you're still invulnerable to damage that turn, so the health thing doesn't matter at all. It completely nullifies that card. So, interesting counter card for Expedition and other options. If you're in a lot of trouble, that's something that can be really, really strong. I think this card, despite being a little inefficient, is a very, very powerful trick, and it's just so good in so many different circumstances. As long as you're playing a unit-focused deck, you might actually want to run that. All right, Emburden. 6 cost, put an enemy unit into its owner's hand, and the enemy player takes 3 debt, with Talir holding up the mask of the queen. Very, very cool. I like this art quite a bit, and it's very nice to see Talir like back sort of in the saddle. I'm very happy with all the like pieces of art with her. It's a good move, I think, overall, away from the Super Saiyan route. 6 cost, so seems really interesting. I think this does quite a number of different interesting things. The main thing is this card is not fast. Emburdening someone does screw with their strategy quite a bit, and I think that's very important in limited formats, but Expedition or Throne, probably not going to see a lot of play. It's just too expensive for what it's doing, and it's too slow. Still, pretty interesting card and a good like 6-cost removal option that actually does hit most units and make it so that it's fairly hard for your opponent to play them again. Your opponent plays a 6-drop, you unburden them, suddenly they can't play anything, and they're down for at least 2 turns on their biggest blocker. That's a reasonable effect in any sort of limited format. Okay. Diminish. 1-cost, set the cursed unit's strength to 0. This is the closest thing to a green permafrost that we've ever had. When you entomb it, the cursed unit gets strength equal to the strength lost. So notably, if you like reset this unit's strength or boost it in some way, you can also entomb it. There's also some really weird tricks going on here. So here's a scenario that's going to be very interesting. You're on the play or something like that. You play down your like 1-cost unit, or you're on turn 2. You've got a little bit of power up, and your opponent casts a diminish on you. One thing that you can do is you can just finest hour your own unit, and your unit's strength will be set to 0. But then when you entomb the diminish, if you actually destroy it with some sort of attachment destruction, you get a permanent +3 attack bonus. So, this I think will be particularly important in Shadow, although Shadow has access to very little attachment destruction, because Shadow has access to some cards that specifically only boost strength on a temporary basis. That being said, the end case where you might actually permanently buff your opponent's unit is not to say that this card is actually bad. The cursed unit is still able to block, notably, which I think is a particularly iffy one, and if you have fast spell attachment destruction, you can even block and then remove the diminish to get your attack back, making for some really, really rough situations where your opponent basically plays themselves. I think all of those are reasons to maybe put this in a more limited format and as a possible an expedition, but it's really going to depend on like how many gameplay patterns people pick up on with Diminish that will be beneficial towards them and bad for your opponent. Typically, leaving the unit on the board is fairly weak. Permafrost is one example where that is not the case, but Diminish lives in a world where green has a lot of access to other options, including Vanquish and Topple. So, like, stuff like that is a little more expensive, but actually deals with the problem permanently, may be stronger than Diminish in those particular respects. I think this card's probably a little bit on the weak side, but the potential to just be a green Permafrost is something that probably shouldn't be ignored, and could be something that we could actually pay attention to later. All right, Shiftstone Sniper, 2-cost 1/1, summon, draw a card. We did talk about this one. It's fine. Brigade Hall, 3-cost. Once per turn, you can pay 5 to give a unit +3/+3 and endurance this turn, and summon, play a 3/3 bear. This is a reference to Svecha, who is going to be, I think, a major player in this story. The mirror, I believe, that like Severin is after in one of the like previous sets is like a mild sort of sub-theme going on here in the current bits of lore that are being released for Cold Hunt. And it is called Cold Hunt, so it's very likely that we're going to see a bit of Svecha in general. But yeah, we got a 3/3 bear for 3 and also a pay 5 ability that's really, really good. I think we did review this card already, but it's a strong option that gives the ability to break permafrosts and also is a 3/3 bear for 3. Good stuff. Guardian we've already done. Realize Your Potential we've already done. Hojin Beloved Son was one of the promo cards. Last Light Refuge, 5-cost 3/5, Endurance and Valor. Okay, this is an interesting set of skills for a 5-cost, and probably a reasonable limited option since the card blocks pretty well and attacks while trading as a 4/6, which, you know, is okay. This card can pretty consistently get a decent amount of damage. Valor is not really that comparable to unblockable or flying or anything along those lines, but it's got that sort of same general value to it where you can get chump blocked, but you're going to gain value out of it. This card's kind of relentless, and I think that makes it for an interesting draft option that could protect a lot of flyers, but it's definitely not insanely powerful all on its own. A very different art style approach with this one. I kind of like it. Some good stuff going on here. Yeah, just a little interesting. And also, we are seeing Zoltan cards come back. You can see the gems in this character's arms. We have a lot of Zoltan refugees from the past, from the alternate dimension, from who knows, heading towards the present day. All right. Starkist Wings, 5-cost 2/1 flying inscribe. How much would you pay to give one of your units flying? The answer is probably 5. You would be okay with that. Elder's Feather is a 1-cost 1/0 that gives units flying. Starkist Wings costs 4 more and only gives you a +1/+1 bonus on top of that. But It fixes your power, which is relatively important, and if you are actually playing a big mid-range deck, you probably want a weapon that gives your stuff flying. So like, and you also probably want a way to get to that weapon after you have like sort of set down your big 6/6 bear or 8/8 bear in Huru. I think this card might see play in Expedition. It does not seem very good, but giving your units flying is just like a very powerful effect, and it's particularly good on a permanent basis with stat bonuses. And yeah, I can see this in a couple of different places, maybe like Rakano Double Damage, most likely in Huru, where you have access to surprising bears. Like there's an 8/8 bear, there's a bunch of other like different options there. Or maybe in Cambrai, where you just have a ton of big sentinels and you just want to give them flying. I think that in all of those situations, this card is mediocre, but really fulfills on your game plan, which means that it might actually see a bit more play in those situations. In draft, this card is obviously nuts. Like, flying is just really, really good, and you're willing to pay a lot of different prices for it. Hypnotic Elder, 6 cost 2 force, contract 4, stun an enemy unit. So this is a pretty bad equivalent to the 4/6 flying endurance that you normally get for 6 in this slot. And the contract is also really expensive for what it's doing. I think this card's pretty bad. I honestly, I'm not even sure that I would pick it in draft. It's okay in that respect, because you do get at least like a little bit of a clock, but the card doesn't even have endurance, which is just like, oh, that's such a bad comparison to the previous owl. Yeah, it's a pretty meh common, and it's not even really a good deck filler because it's just a, a 6 cost. So you're probably going to be trying to play a little more efficiently than this. This card might be the worst one we've reviewed so far. Rune Sword, 7 cost 4/4, Inscribe Relic Weapon. Pretty expensive for a Relic Weapon. The Inscribe does definitely add a lot to it, and it's a very powerful effect. And it's just nice to have extra Relic Weapons every now and then. If you're giving this double damage, you're not feeling too unhappy about it, because it's good stuff on that front, but I believe playing it as a depleted power means that it stays a depleted power and is not in your void, notably. So I would struggle to say that this card is going to be good. It will be an okay option at the top of your curve in draft. Okay, Pathfinder we've done, Trick Throw we've done, Chloric Mix we've done, and Caustic Rain as well. Snowpeak Eagle, I think, is the next one on our list. Ooh, what's the word? It's Thunderbird. 4 cost 2/3, Flying Aegis and Inscribe. Thunderbird is a 5 cost 2/2 with Aegis and Flying, and that card was fine in draft. This is a reasonable way to carry weapons, and it also happens to be like a little bit tougher and more resilient and comes down a turn faster, so you can play weapons on it. Yeah, seems like a solid draft or limited strategy. I could even potentially see this in a deck that is just really focused around like getting some sort of extra damage through in the air or putting weapons on top of blue units, both of which are not likely strategies in a deck, but could be something where you actually would consider this card, particularly because of that Inscribe. Ice Regent, I believe we've done this one. Yeah, Numbing Cold and a couple of other things. Cloudline Shaman, 5 costs 3/3 Aegis, so another improvement on Thunderbird, and this one has Contract 4, play a 3/3 Sky Serpent with Flying. This card's disgusting in draft. It's 2 6/6s, or it's 6/6 worth of stats in Flyers divided amongst 2 units, one of which has Aegis, and it's just like a very, very good use of your time and money. Like, you'd pay 4 for a 3/3 Sky Serpent and Flying, especially when you get to just play it on tempo with another 5-drop. I think that is just like very, very strong, solid limited option. Flyers really rule the landscape in these types of situations, and this is one where the Flyer is both really resilient, capable of blocking most other Flyers, and also just deals a lot of damage. Look at how this compares against that 2/4 that stuns an enemy unit. Like, you just get to block that and keep it completely on lockdown, and you have a second Serpent, so if you're on attack, you're gonna get 3 damage through. And it only costs 5, and it's got a contract of 4. Like, that's... no. Yeah, this is a very, very strong card, and maybe another demonstration of why the Hypnotic Elder is not going to be that great. Learn to Bite, 5 cost, transform a unit into a 5/5 Carnosaur with Killer. There's a version of this, I think, that's like 4 to turn something into a 5/5 Carnosaur that doesn't have Killer. It might have Overwhelm or something like that. So this is a different approach to that. Generally, these blue cards can be used both offensively and defensively. This is the least offensively used that I can think of. Like, you just don't want to hit your enemy's unit with this. You pretty much have to hit your units with this, and when that happens, you get a reasonable unit for the cost. I would say a 5/5 Carnosaur with Killer is something that you'd be happy to do to a Grenadin or a Temple Scribe or an Open Way Supplier, anything like that. You're probably like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take a 5/5 Carnosaur and murder one of my opponent's things. That seems awesome. But by and large, this card is not like amazingly strong in most other respects. It is blue removal in draft, and I think in Expedition, if you have the very right type of deck where you just seem to have a lot of like random useless units near the 5 mark, then this is something that you could probably pull out of the market or maybe even put in the deck to get a little bit of a leg up on the board. Although your time may be better spent playing many of the other 5-drop heroes that are going to be available. So it's competing with a lot of different stuff in this slot. But slow removal is still removal in blue, and that might be something that makes it worth it to run. Call the hit. Kill an enemy unit with 2 strength or less for 1. Solid little option there. It's a suffocate, but it's got inscribe, and it's got more of a restriction on it. I think the restriction here is not actually all that bad. Like, Suffocate is a card that you're just willing to play a lot of the time, and there are a lot of different targets that you can hit with this that are still going to be pretty reasonable. For example, there's a 2/4 owl with inscribe. I'm just not gonna stop mocking that for the rest of the video, am I? Okay, so yeah, this is a card that is just like absolutely like fine. I would say the fixing in Shadow is really good. The card is typically efficient on the first couple of turns, and on the turns later on where it may hit a really good target, but if you actually end up holding on to it and you don't have any good targets, I mean, you're really not unhappy with the depleted power. This is one of the stronger inscribe cards. I can see this being a 4 of in most Expedition decks, and even being a 4 of in some Throne decks. All right, Collude. Unit of your choice can't block this turn. Draw a card. It's a reasonable little option there. Gets you a little bit of extra damage through, gives you a card. It's not exactly a Dark Wisp or anything, but it's potentially a way to win a game, and if it's not, you're at least getting a card back. Wouldn't say it's terrible, but just a pretty minor effect overall, and certainly not as strong as some of the other cantripping options in Shadow. Usury Writer. Contract 3, the player of your choice discards the top 5 cards of their deck. So it's a mill card, but it's also a 2/3 card for double Shadow Influence. This card's okay on stats. It's reasonably defensive. I can see it being played pretty well in draft. If you're going for a particular mill strat in draft, then maybe you pay the contract on this, but that's an awful lot for that mill. I would say this card is pretty minor in terms of overall effects, and tying up your power on later turns is not going to be that effective for a mill deck, because mill decks really want to just be milling people every turn until they die, because otherwise they're going to run into the situation where they die first to damage, which is going to be fairly common. I think Usury Rider does have some nice defensive options going on with it, so if you're playing like full Shadow mill, it could be okay, and I could definitely see a situation in draft where a bunch of these actually does turn into a situation where your opponent just mills out of cards, but I'm skeptical of that one. All right, Kidnapper. When you summon, the enemy player discards a unit of your choice from their hand. Entomb, the enemy player draws a card. So 3 for a 3/1 is still a reasonable stat in most draft formats, but the issue here is that you are discarding a unit from their hand, and if they don't have a unit in their hand, the Entomb still gives them an extra card. So this card is negative card advantage on a pretty frequent basis. It also dies a lot because it's a 3/1 and it has 1 health. So Elf Bat is a cool subtype, but I think this card is really risky. Probably would still play it in limited formats, but not amazing in any regard, and you're going to be really sad every time this card dies, and really annoyed every time that you play it and it doesn't hit anything, more so than usual with cards in the sabotage and other veins. I'm not a big fan of these cards in general because like whiffing on them just feels so bad. In this case, when you whiff, you're incredibly behind, and that's a big issue. All right, Eavesdrop. Forecast. Inscribe. The enemy player discards 2 cards of their choice from their hand, and then you steal their entire void. This is very good if you want to activate a bunch of stuff that is specifically about like how many spells you have in your void, how many units you have in your void, can you mass resurrect your void, do you have the ability to like get a whole bunch of cards back all at once. You can pair this very weirdly, I think. I don't know if it would work. The coding might actually not even just like account for this situation, would be my guess. But it's basically just like if you kill your opponent's units and then you eavesdrop and make them discard their hand and then steal their void, you can probably then, if you still have 5 power left, play the card that says get back 3 units that died this turn and just take units that you killed, which is not great as a combo, but it's kind of an interesting idea that I would see as being pretty fun to play around with. Yeah, this card is pretty solid. It's 2 cards worth of advantage. It is 2 cards of their choice, but it's very likely to empty out their hand on turn 4. The Inscribe is icing on the cake because you're probably just going to be playing this card for what it is actually for, but the one risk to cards like these is that your opponent doesn't have enough cards, and when that happens, playing it for a depleted power is awesome. And then, like, stealing their void on top of that means you just completely shut off all void-based strategies and you completely boost up your own deck's void for reasons of whatever it is you're trying to do. Yeah, this card I think actually is reasonably strong. It's pretty efficient for the amount of card advantage it's providing in terms of discard. 4-cost discard 2 is traditionally like a very strong draft or expedition option. And, like, yeah, stealing their void's a big deal. That could really lead into some very unusual strategies. I would love to just sort of see this in like Praxis with the Moment of Creation or something like that, just to like boost up those big sentinels you're getting off of the amount of spells in your deck. Okay, Soul Feast, Lifesteal, deal 3 damage. Well, it's not an extract, which is Lifesteal, deal 3 damage for 3, but it is fast, which is important. I would say that that is a significant upgrade for the cost that it is playing. Not having Scout, I think, is a big deal here. Just comparing it to Extract, where you get Scout and you get to kill the unit pretty early, so you're probably actually aiming at something that has 3 health, and also like you just like, yeah, I think that's a little bit more of a flexible card. Soul Feast is a fast spell removal card that I think you're going to be really willing to play in draft, but beyond that, it's okay. Maybe in like a blue or red spell damage deck, you could actually get some very good use out of this. I think the lifesteal is a big bonus. Killing a unit and gaining a bunch of health is very nice. And, you know, I honestly would pay an awful lot for a Spirit Drain, so that is still going to be a very, very good card in draft environments. So, yeah, that's a pretty worthwhile card in a lot of different aspects. The most notable of which is that it hits sites. I think that's a very important aspect of this card if you're considering it as removal. It's the fact that it just kills a wide variety of sites that have 3 health. Okay, the Rat King we've done. Vermin's Feast. This is an unusual one. 6-cost with Inscribe. Swap the strength and health of one unit with the strength and health of another unit. Really good combat trick because you get to basically just like make one of your units really, really big, make one of their units really, really small, kill that unit that you just made really, really small because you're blocking with the unit that is now really, really big. That's a worthwhile trick because you get a permanent benefit. You also remove your opponent's unit from the game, so you have like significantly more board advantage, and you paid 6 for it. So solid, solid limited trick, potentially useful in Expedition, and the Inscribe, once again, icing on the cake. Glad that there are so many good Inscribe cards in this format. Rhombus Challenge, give a unit +3 and invulnerable to damage this turn, and it is a challenge because it's a slow spell, so you have to play it basically at the start of the round, just be like, come at me, come on, which no one's gonna do because it's a dumb challenge. You're not supposed to block this card. Good way to get a little bit of damage through, and the invoke ability just replaces the card. So yeah, I mean, put this on a double damage unit, watch it just sort of plow through a bunch of your opponent's stuff, and then like be really happy because you got a new card that replaces that one. Very, very good in all of the like limited formats, and little slow for Expedition, but Invoke's powerful, so I can definitely see it being something. Very unlikely to actually get you any card advantage itself, and does cost you an entire turn worth of tempo, but kind of fun in the later periods of the game, or if you've got some ways to reduce the cost of the card. Okay, Aegon, Mithril Daimyo. 4-cost, 4/4, pay 1 and exhaust Aegon to play a +4/+4 Mithril Armor on one of your units that attacked this turn. So you're playing for this on 5, notably. And if you do, then you just get to put a 4/4 Mithril Armor on another unit. The disadvantage to this is that if you play it on 5 to do exactly that trick, which I think is the stronger trick, you can't pay for the contract, which is play 2/1/1/1/2 Oni Samurai with Warcry. So if you're behind, Ijin Mithril Daimyo places a 4/4, and then it plays 2/1/2 Oni Samurai, which are only good when you're Warcrying. So this card is not as strong on the back end as it is on the front end. If you're ahead and you're attacking, then playing Ijin on 5 leads to one unit that is just going to be really stupid huge, and a 4/4 unit that needs to be dealt with, or it's going to make every unit that is attacking stupid huge. This is an insanely strong expedition card in that respect. Paying for the contract, I think that's a sucker's game in most situations. You just don't really want to do that because the card gives you that mithril armor when you play it if you are playing it on 5. So definitely keep in mind that the contract here is probably not worth it in most circumstances, but I think if you are in a draft environment where you just need a bunch of units and a bunch of stuff on the board, there's certainly some situations where it's good, and also it gives you some Oni Samurai specifically to exhaust on the next turn, which you shouldn't have any problems doing because the contract costs as much as Ijin itself. So yeah, there's some nice circumstances here, and the card does lead to just spiraling board advantage if it is not removed in either situation. This seems like a strong expedition and even a potentially strong throne card. I mean, just imagine putting a 4/4 mithril armor on a flyer for 5 while also getting a unit on the ground. That's really, really good. This is a solid Ijin. I think this card should see play in pretty much all the formats. It's not like the most amazing throne card, but it is still quite good on that front. Okay, Frostburn, 2 damage to an enemy or 1 damage to 2 enemies. So it's either I think there is actually a single card that does exactly this thing for 2, but this one has invoke, and it's not a fast spell. Losing fast is an issue here, but the invoke cards all seem really strong to me. I think that just being able to pick a card of your choice while also doing something to advance the board state is gonna be pretty solid. This card's clearly better than Ramba's Challenge in terms of like advancing the board state, because it does actually kill enemies and sometimes even get you an insane amount of card advantage. Solid little option that actually pairs really well with spell damage. I think this is going to be a good card in most types of decks and a good support for the Skycrag spell damage list. Okay, Zoe's amazing. Alessi's Choice. Kill an enemy unit with 4 strength or more, or kill an enemy relic with cost 4 or more. 2 different things that I think are pretty worth it, and also the indication that we're getting another choice cycle. Isn't that exciting? I think this will be 10 choices most likely. Yeah, always happy to have charms in the game. This is one that I think gives you either a Vanquish, which, heck yeah, a Combre Vanquish seems great, or a Relic option, Destruction, which I think adds to the strength of this card even more. This card's stronger than Vanquish. That's pretty real. I would say this is really, really worth it in a Combre deck and will be a card that replaces Vanquish in a wide variety of Throne decks, so I'm super into that. Yeah, seems great. Dive Bomber, 3 cost 2/3, flying, pay 3, and sacrifice Dive Bomber to kill an enemy unit with 5 strength or more. Okay. I don't think I was looking over this one previously, so this is my first look at it, but I do think it is actually pretty good. Yeah, 3 cost 2/3 for flying is good option in draft, but also like a reasonable weapon carrier and a pretty healthy flyer overall for its stat line. It's not a 3/3 for 3, which is I think sort of the big baseline there, the Valkyrie Enforcer level, but the ability to kill a big unit with it on top of the ability to pressure your opponent in the air is interesting. The card is not worth card advantage, and you have to pay a lot of power to actually get that kill ability off, but it does threaten and pressure your opponent's board in a way that is actually pretty unique, and it's fairly cheap and doesn't come down in a tempo slot that's going to be like extremely competitive, I would say. There are some good 3-cost cards, but this is a reasonable option that allows you to pressure sites, deal damage to your opponent, put weapons down on cards, buff the unit with other sorts of effects, and then, like, if none of that works, kill something of theirs. So, yeah, reasonably flexible, good option in Expedition, and a pretty strong draft card. Alessi High Archonist. 5 cost, when you play a spell, Alessi gets +1/+1 for each of its factions. Its factions, interesting. Contract 2, gain 3 armor and play a spell from your hand that costs 3 or less. So not card advantage for that contract, but definitely tempo advantage for that contract. If the spell that you are playing does something that in some way affects relic weapons, then the 3 armor on top of that is going to be a pretty huge bonus. For example, you could play Rise to the Challenge off of a Lessie High Archonist and get a weapon that then has +2 strength and +3 armor, which if that's your 6-drop weapon, that might be a really, really big deal. That's like a Stone Scar Maul that's got 8 and 7. That's a pretty big one. I think more importantly is a card like the 5 cost that creates a 3/3 Gemblade, because now you've got like a 3 a 3/5 Gemblade that you just played on top of your unit, which is pretty sweet. And also your Alessi Hurricanist becomes a 4/4 as a result of that. This card's got some really interesting potential in armory decks and in like just any deck where it wants to play spells. Combre spells is going to be very, very interesting, but yeah, that armor is the thing that interests me the most, because when you're doing that in combination with a spell that creates armory tempo, you got some very, very unusual options with relic weapons that can be pretty cool. But regardless, the card does gain you a decent amount of life, grows pretty dramatically, and plays well with spells. It's obviously a draft bomb, an expedition bomb, and I could definitely see this in a throne deck that is trying to play with Alessi's particular build around. We didn't review Curiox All-Seeing, which I think was one of the promo cards, but we'll talk about that in just a second. First, we have Open Your Eyes, transform a unit into a random unit that costs 2 more, gain health equal to the unit's health. I wish this was a fast spell. It would be a very dumb trick if it was a fast spell. Regardless, this is a reasonable upgrade to a unit that also gives you a little bit of health in the process. It's not card efficient or anything like that, but it's definitely worth it if your unit has been removed by something. I'm curious how this interacts with the green card that reduces an enemy unit's strength to 0. My guess would be that you get the new unit with whatever strength it normally would have, and then after you destroy the extra bonus, you get some other good stuff. So, like, yeah, I think, like, this is a pretty interesting tool in an Elysian kit, and could be really, really solid for making a lot of, like, random chaff units into very threatening cards. Not a competitive slot overall. I mean, 3 cost is something that you can definitely do. I would like this card to be fast, but that's just because it would be fun and broken. And it's currently extremely fun, probably not broken. It's just fine. It's not like amazing by any means, and it's one of the more like mediocre spells you can play, but I think it's very interesting and strong, and I like the art for it too. All right, Curiox All-Seeing, Flying Endurance. You can take that equal to the number of cards in your hand to put a Dragon's Eye on top of your deck. So a 6 cost 5/5 that if you play it on an empty hand, just gives you 3 cards on the next turn. Pretty good. It is only like 2 cards worth of advantage because the Dragon's Eye goes on top of your deck. So you draw the card that you would normally draw off Dragon's Eye, and then you also draw 2 additional cards, which, you know, that's pretty minor. I mean, you know, the equivalent of drawing 3 cards is still really, really strong here. And it replaces your draw. Yeah, no, I'm wrong about this. This is just 3 cards worth of advantage. You'd pay... The question is sort of like, how many cards in your hand would you have before you wouldn't play Curiox? And I think the answer is honestly somewhere in the 6 to 8 range. Dragon's Eye is an insanely powerful effect that typically costs 6 to play. If you want to draw 3 cards, then that's how much that you generally want to do it for. But getting a 5/5 unit on top of getting a Dragon's Eye is just like insane. So yeah, this card seems really, really good. Flying and Endurance are both good stat lines. It's an Elysian card, so it gets a lot of good bonuses on top of that. If you're really not satisfied with this card, you can always give it the old Open Your Eyes treatment and turn it into an 8-drop later, but I think the stat line's perfectly fine. And then that summon ability just basically refills your hand in Elysian, which is amazing for mid-range and amazing for control, and makes you really happy to play this card. I think this card's going to be Expedition, potentially even a Throne staple. It's really strong. Midnight Disappearance, put an enemy unit into its owner's hand. It gets -2, -1. And you also get to invoke. Okay, so here's some neat little bonuses. I would say that this card is fine. It's mild removal that also gives you the invocability and sends the card back to hand. It's notably doing a little bit more to improve your board state than Talir's Burden, where you're paying 6 to put the enemy unit into their hand, and then you give them like 3 death. This card just kills smaller units and makes some units to the point where they just aren't really worth playing, but it also messes with your ability to like cause them to discard cards of their choice. If they have sacrifice effects, they don't care about this at all. There are a lot of situations where the Midnight Disappearance might actually like lead to them not really being affected by it in any sort of meaningful way. It's also not fast, notably, but it does have the invoke ability, and like cards with invoke printed on them can be very bad before they stop being good. Midnight Disappearance has the disadvantage of a pretty high cost and not a huge amount of additional like benefit on board, so it compares pretty similarly to Talir's Burden because it's just like very expensive for this type of effect. But Invoke is still a really, really strong ability. I think you'd pay 5 for it in, draft environments, expedition environments, but not in Throne. Expedition seems unlikely to run a lot of this, honestly. Disarm. Hello, Svetcha. Kill an attacking enemy unit. Alright, seems fair. It's a lightning bolt, but it actually kills everything. Cool. The equivalents to this are Lightning Bolt, the 3-cost blue card that deals 6 damage to attacking enemy units, and Island's Choice, which deals 4 to enemy or kills enemy units with 4 strength or higher. Disarm is significantly more flexible than that and kills a wider variety of units, meaning it's probably going to be a Huru staple. I think it's just strong enough to do what it needs to do and get you the situations that you want to get out of it, and it also doesn't cost a lot and it's a fast spell, so reasonable stuff. Icy Hold, silence and stun a unit at fast with Invoke. Yeah, very much into this. This is something where you get a Rebuke, but you get it at fast spell speed, which is a slight upgrade from Rebuke, and then the Invoke ability also means that you get to play some other cards on top of that. Little expensive, obviously, not going to be amazing in that respect, but I think that overall this is something that seems like it's going to be one of the stronger cards in this Invoke cycle, just due to the ability to influence your opponent's board, silence things that really need to be silenced, turn stuff off for a pretty decent amount of time, and get a card in the process. All at fast spell speed, which means you get to hold up and play with your like big draw cards or any sort of draw go options that you want to play with, and if you don't need to play Icy Hold, then you don't have to play Icy Hold. That's pretty good stuff. Still an augmentation. Give one of your units +1/+1 and an enemy unit -1/-1. Invoke for Argentport. Okay. So here's some neat stuff going on. This is very similar to that 6-cost trick that sort of trades health values. I think that this is a pretty significant upgrade at fast spell speed that actually leads to it being a very, very good combat trick. Of the 5 that we've seen, this might actually be the strongest of the batch. It just really actually does remove a unit from the game very frequently when that unit is attacking, and it does it at 3 cost at fast. And on top of that, you get the Argentport Invoke, which is awesome. You can kill tokens and any sort of 1 health unit with this very easily. The unit that you're giving +1/+1 can be something that really, really needs it. And all of that on top of just a draw of your choice from like a set of 3. Pretty chef's kiss by and large. I think we've reviewed Eodria, and I think we've reviewed Volunteer Corps. So Eodria is just ridiculous, though. That, I think, does it for the spoiler breakdown as far as all of the in-client spoilers go. I hope you enjoyed this review. I think it turned out to be a pretty comprehensive one. I wasn't quite prepared for how many of those there were. I'm sure this is going to be like a 50-minute video when it's all said and edited, but nonetheless, it's super fun. I fixed the link to my alternate M-Plays channel, so you can go there if you want to see me play some Arkham. We're going to be on Twitch streaming pretty soon, and we'll be streaming lots of Eternal. We're definitely going to be on the 10th, because that's going to be a really fun time, and playing with the new set Cold Hunt, so very, very excited about that. And beyond that, you can find me on Twitter or Discord. You can get notifications for when I have videos and Twitch stuff live, and on Discord you can customize which notifications you get, so if you are interested in just getting like YouTube notifications for this channel or notifications when I go live, there's like reaction rules and stuff set up for that, so all fun. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. See you next time. Have a lovely evening. Cheers.